Hi teachers, this is Mr. Brown. I hope this video finds you well. Today I will be providing an introduction to the concept of success criteria, which I know that we've talked about before. I gave a PowerPoint which might have been a little maybe dense in terms of information. And so today I wanted to take this opportunity just to kind of provide an overview, and hopefully it heightens your understanding and generates some synergy around an instructional strategy that I do believe can positively impact student achievement. And so with that being said, I just want to remind you that I can't say enough how much learning, the learning of adults substantially impacts the culture and the achievement of our students. And so it is important that we ourselves are engaged in learning. And so I'm excited to be on this journey with you. So here's our learning objective for today. So if this video is successful, teachers will understand the process for creating a success criteria, and they will also understand how to use it to support student achievement. So before I get into the technicalities of how to go about doing this, I want to talk a little bit about the why. And so I want to pose this question. What does a person need in order to learn a new skill? And I actually want you to take a moment to think about this. So I invite you to pause the video and generate your list. And when you are done, press play. So it is likely that your list is perhaps more comprehensive or more thorough than mine, but I actually wanted to take a moment to share with you what I thought of when I tried to answer that question. The first thing that I thought was important was in learning a new skill is, to some degree, you have to understand the task. You have to understand, what am I trying to do? What is the goal here? What are we trying to solve? And so there's a lot of ways that teachers can go about making sure that a student understands the task, whether that be an image or video or directions. There's a ton of ways to do it, but I think you have to understand the task or the challenge in some way. The next thing that I would say is necessary when learning something new is you need practice opportunities. So unless you are just this savant prodigy person who kind of gets it as soon as they're exposed to it, the average person is going to need some practice opportunities to master or learn a new skill. And finally, the last portion is feedback. So and by the way, the feedback doesn't have to come from the teacher. It could actually be sort of self-generated if they really kind of understand the criteria. But it's important that they have feedback so that they are just kind of getting better. And so these are my three criteria. Hey, we need to understand the task. We need practice opportunities. We need feedback. And the reason why this success criteria becomes so important to me is because I would argue that all three of these things happen as a result of a strong success criteria. A success criteria will help a student understand the task. It will begin to facilitate practice opportunities. And it also is a tool that can be used to provide feedback. And so for those reasons, I think we have to have revisited this concept, because I think it's incredibly important. And again, it has the potential to positively impact student achievement. So just as a way to facilitate our learning, I've actually generated a rather arbitrary task just to serve as an example for success criteria. So say we ask students to write an opening adjective sentence like the one below. And the sentence reads, incredibly, the man was still chasing after us, which I think is a beautifully constructed sentence, by the way. And so the task here becomes, hey, I want you to write one just like this. And if I were doing this, the first thing that I would do with students is give them an invitation to observe. In other words, what do you notice about the sentence? And in their noticing, the students really can't be wrong because they're simply making an observation. And so I'm willing to bet that if I gave this task to students, here's maybe what they might notice. They might notice that the sentence begins with an ly word. That might even be their exact language. And so I happen to know that words that end with ly are called adverbs, but I also know that not all adverbs end in an ly. But that, honestly, the technical language is not important. A student might simply say, hey, I noticed that the first word ends in ly. They also might notice that there is a comma immediately after the ly word. And then lastly, they may notice that after the comma is a complete sentence. And maybe as a student says this, maybe they won't, but a sentence happens to include a subject, verb, and an object. So there are the three observations. A word that begins or begin with the word that ends in ly, insert a comma immediately after that ly word, and then following the comma, make sure that you have a complete sentence. And so, believe it or not, the work is 90% done at this point. I'm simply going to take those observations and create a little chart here that will serve as our success criteria. And so notice that the only thing that I changed is the did I language. So here are the metacognitive questions that a student is asking themselves as they are trying to create a sentence similar to the one that we showed. So did I begin with the word that ends in ly? Did I insert a comma immediately after that ly word? Did I write a full sentence after the comma? And so that becomes my success criteria. The art, if you will, is asking enough questions that even if a student didn't naturally come up with this list, that it leads them in this direction. You might also find that students offer something that is different than you would have anticipated, but also heighten everyone's understanding of how to complete that task. Okay, so there's nothing to it but to do it. So at this point, we're going to transition to you actually practicing at this time. So again, for the sake of our learning, I again have generated a rather arbitrary task. This is actually a really cool worksheet about different types of narrative leads. For the sake of our example, we are going to say that you want to write a narrative lead that starts with dialogue, which is the highlighted section. So I invite you to pause the video. And while you have paused the video, I first want you to read through the exemplar, which is the dialogue section, which is highlighted. Then I'm going to invite you to write down your observations. Following writing down your observations, I want you to use those observations to create your own success criteria. So take a moment and pause this video. So now that you've had the opportunity to practice and generate your own success criteria, I now want to walk through my own observations, and this will give you an opportunity to compare and contrast what I observed versus what you did. And in some cases, you might find that you were able to be more clear or more concise in your language. You might find that my observations or noticings were helpful as well. So the first observation that I said was that the introduction paragraph for this type of narrative lead starts with characters talking, which is indicated by quotation marks. So again, Scott, get down here on the double, right? So just pretty simple. The next thing is that this is followed by a sentence that contains a subject and a vibrant verb. So if you look at the examples, in the first line it says, Dad bellowed, I hollered, later you see he replied. And so those are some examples that after the dialogue is followed by a short sentence that contains a subject and a vibrant verb. The third thing that I noticed was the use of descriptive language that helps the audience to see the action. So if you look at the first line, it says, his voice sounded far away. And the next line, it says, I squinted through the screen door, but couldn't see him. And so you have language here that is descriptive and is helping the audience to kind of like see what's happening. And then I just put a fourth criteria is like, hey, like repeat steps 1 through 3 as desired. And so you will notice that when I make my criteria for success now, I simply modify this to have the phrase did I in front. And this becomes the metacognitive questions that students can ask themselves to see if they are fulfilling the express criteria. And finally, I just want to leave you with a few tips as you seek to create your own success criteria. One of the earliest things that I will look at is this a transferable skill? That's a question I will be asking myself, because if it is a transferable skill, something they're going to use in other content areas, then that might make for a good skill to focus on. The other thing that I wonder is if the skill is high stakes or foundational. Because if it is imperative that a student understands the specific skill, then it might be worth creating a success criteria. I would also add that the best success criteria are student generated. So rather than focusing on using your own language or language that makes sense to you, it really becomes important in your facilitation of it that you allow students to use language that makes sense to them. And finally, if at first students do not express an important criteria, simply just ask questions until they articulate what you are looking for. And so that really to me is like the art of the whole thing. It's hard to almost explicitly teach that. You can kind of model it some, but that really is kind of the that's the art involved in this process. And so I'm an English teacher, so I happen to have walked through some English examples. I'm going to make a video soon where I'm going to walk through some math examples modeling this. But I also want to say that in our 100-minute session, we are going to focus on and allocate some time for you to generate both an exemplar response and success criteria. This is something that you are going to submit at the very end of PD. So if you're a person who likes to work ahead or just kind of needs the extra processing time, I encourage you to work ahead if that's something that you would like to do, but we will have time allocated to this during our Wednesday PD session. I hope that this was helpful. And again, I really do believe that if we can commit to this with some fidelity and belief, that it does have the potential to positively impact student achievement. So I hope this was helpful, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.